This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Terrible news. Greens hate housing. Headline in our ABC. Apartment towers up to 75 stories proposed for Woolloongabba to alleviate housing crisis. Opposed by Greens?
What the hell? But I thought we liked good things.
I thought we liked housing.
Things.
I thought we were pro-housing. Apparently we're anti-housing.
Oh,
There's even a photo in this article of lovely former Serious Danger guest, two-time guest, Amy McMahon. Why would she do this?
What the hell is going on?
What is going on? The article reads, a plan to build more high-density apartments and affordable housing to combat Brisbane's cost of living crisis has received stiff opposition from the Greens. They are talking, of course, about the proposed Woolloongabba Priority Development Area, a.k.a. PDA. We're getting into acronyms, baby.
Isn't that public space of affection when you're like making out with?
Oh, yeah. Wow. I'm so Queensland politics brained that when you say PDA, I think Priority Development Area. Greens oppose PDAs. Keep it to yourself. Keep your hands in your fucking pockets or get a room.
Public displays of affordable housing. Yeah.
Don't want you to get a room because they're opposing rooms that are affordable. That's right. We're tying it all back together. Just very quickly on this one, because it is one of those articles that is so frustrating because you know that all Labor will need is this headline to print on a little flyer attacking the Greens in the upcoming state election. And I bet we will see this we will see this headline on a flyer, even though it is so fucking misleading. This is an article about the PDA that's been proposed by the state government for Woolloongabba. For people who aren't familiar with PDAs, I don't know if you have an equivalent in other states, but it's basically like a streamlined planning process where the state government takes control of the process rather than council. And it's in theory meant to be to like make good things for public benefit happen on public land. And what this one is proposing, there have been various iterations over the last 14 years now, since 2010, when there was first an urban development area declared in Woolloongabba. But this is the latest PDA. It's 106 hectares proposed, including a bunch of prime, inner city public space, publicly owned land in Woolloongabba on Brisbane's south side. And it includes a bunch of things. It kind of is around the Cross River rail development, new rail development. It's near the Gabba Stadium. It includes mixed-use development, and it includes a bunch of new housing, aiming for an extra 14,000 dwellings by 2066. But to suggest that this is this article implies, right, that this is like an affordable housing or even like a social housing development, right?
Yes.
That's kind of what you get.
Alleviate the housing crisis.
Yeah, it's development to alleviate the housing crisis. Only if you believe that every single development, which these fucking YIMBY development-brained people do, that every development is, quote, to alleviate the housing crisis or is affordable housing. Like all new housing equals affordable housing. No, actually, what this PDA proposes so far, only after lobbying from the Greens, by the way, to make part of it public and affordable housing, there's like an aim in there that they would maybe like 20% of the ground floor area of new developments with 10 dwellings or more to be social or affordable housing, which means it's going to be quote unquote affordable housing. Yes. What does affordable housing mean? Well, at least it's not defined yet, but it kind of refers to this standard that says it would probably be aiming to be no more than 30% of the gross median household income for rent, which is probably at least around $750 a week. Okay. So not super affordable.
Isn't that exactly the definition of housing stress? Like if you're 1% over that, then you're in housing stress.
Then you're in housing stress.
Yeah,
that's right.
So just the most you possibly can charge someone as well, without pushing them gross. So what?
Yeah, gross household income. Okay. So if you're a single person,
2 incomes, great. Fantastic.
Yeah, and it's not about your income. It's median income. So for people who are on low incomes, which is what it says it's targeted towards, it says this is targeted for people on low to moderate incomes, but the benchmark is using the median income. So anyway, putting aside how shit that definition of affordable is, there's no requirement for 20% of these to be affordable. It's just a suggestion. It's just something that would be nice. It's just something that they're like, we would like it if you guys did that. And maybe we'll consider your development application favorably if you do that. Or it's just it's such fucking nonsense. And so, yeah, this
I
article.
love the affordable phrase that we talked about this on the phone earlier in the week. When they announce this, they should say, okay, this new development will be 80% unaffordable housing. Like that's how they should.
That's what Amy is saying.
Yeah, right.
Amy, literally, like in the article, Amy McMahon says 20% affordable housing requirement, even though it's not a requirement, by the way, reporter, do your job, is too low since it meant 80% of houses would be unaffordable.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Anyway, this is an article, once again, just a final point, pushed by this YIMBY Queensland group, which, wouldn't you know it, is a developer-funded, astroturfed group in Queensland that is led by, what do they call them in there? Oh, pro-development activist, they call this woman, Natalie Raymond, YIMBY Queensland chief executive. And if you look at her, she's a member of the Property Council of Australia. Great. She founded this organisation. She's worked in development for many years. She's a fucking development lobbyist that has decided to start a fake group. And this journalist is fucking falling for it. And this journalist seems to have an interesting number of articles with this like YIMBY angle in Greens electorates. So I just find that interesting.
Do these people actually live, like, unless it is actually in your backyard? I don't know if you could be.
True. I don't even know if this is in her backyard. I don't know where she lives, to be honest. I haven't looked that up yet.
She means
we don't do doxing here.
It's yayi. Yes, in your backyard.
Yes, in your backyard. Yeah.
To help my profits.
Look, I would love affordable housing in my backyard. This isn't affordable. That's why the Greens have been saying, like, have done all these submissions and run events and everything on how we need it to be more affordable. But go off as always.
Go off, King.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
People need to have a conversation with their kids and their grandkids, with their next door neighbours, just about how evil the current Greens party is.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia. Serious danger to Australia.
Hello everyone, this is Serious Danger, podcast about green politics in Australia. I am Tom Ballard. Hello.
Hello, I'm Emerald Moon.
I'm coming to you from lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, specifically the airport. Once again, it's an airport episode. Sorry about that, everyone, but I think
he's in the Qantas lounge.
Shut
He's
up!
Not like
I'm
us. Not like us.
I'm
not like us.
I'm with my fellow workers and comrades here.
Meanwhile,
Solidarity, mate. Revolution.
I'm just in my humble mansion home on Yagara and Turrbal country.
This is not an official Greens Party podcast, but this is the official Anti-Semitism Party podcast. It is made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael Griffin. Obviously, massive week for the party. We are going to be joined by the former Greens candidate of the Victorian seat of Northcote and a member of the Jewish Greens, Campbell Gome, to talk about everyone condemning the Anti-Semitic Greens and apparently the Greens being worse than an actual genocide that's taking place. I mean, truly one of the most ridiculous weeks in Australian politics I've seen for a very long time, obviously coming to it from a Greens lens, but Jesus Christ, calm the fuck down, everyone. What are you talking about?
Yes, his exclusive first podcast interview since the news broke that he was involved in these alleged violent protests.
He gave a speech somewhere at one time.
And then left.
Thanks to people supporting the show via Patreon, patreon.com/seriousdangerau. For just $3 a month, you get bonus content. Big thanks to Jamie, Nick, Christine, Rob, Deviani, another Nick, I believe, Lee, and Laura. We love you very much. We'd like to give a quick plug to the Melbourne Comedy Night that is happening. This is another Greens comedy fundraiser that's happening in Melbourne on Saturday, June 22nd. Link in the show notes. I'm hosting, Dave O'Neill, Geraldine Hickey, lots of very cool people. We'd love to see you there at the Beer Deluxe in Federation Square.
Quickly, before we get into it as well, the news broke this week that the new Anti-Corruption Commission, our precious Nacc, is not going to pursue any of the referrals made in relation to the villains behind Robodebt.
Yes,
good news.
No corruption here. They're gonna focus on lessons learned, I believe.
Lessons learned.
Quote. They don't want to go over a double investigation. They don't want to put people through the terrible process of being forced to answer questions again, even though they may have definitely done something wrong. Fucking bleak. Maybe in a future episode we'll get further into what that actually means, as once again the victims of the Robodebt scheme are fucked over by the system. But a little shout out to Michael the Griff Griffin, our producer, here in The Guardian's coverage of the story. The decision was met with anger and sadness by victims and whistleblowers. Michael Griffin, who was hit with a false $3,197 debt in late 2016, said it was shameful and showed justice would elude victims. This is the first proper test of the new Nacc, and the result couldn't be clearer. It is weak as piss, he said. Hearing this news makes it clear there is no pathway to justice for the victims of Robodebt.
Weak as piss.
Weak
Absolutely
as piss.
right. I mean, that's the irony, yes, of the Nacc justifying their decision not to pursue this, pretty much on the basis that, like, it's a self-admission that the Nacc is useless in a way, because they have no ability to actually impose sanctions or compensation or anything that might meaningfully provide justice for victims of Robodebt. So they're like, well, really, there's not much point, because there's already these other kind of just question-asking exercises going on, and that's all we can really do anyway. So there you go.
And this is also another future episode, but my understanding is that some architects of Robodebt are involved in this new NDIS scheme, which is to raise debts against people with disabilities to reclaim their NDIS money. Jesus Christ, we live in a hell world.
Mr Speaker, the days of these wedge motions being put to the Parliament and going to a vote end now.
This ends now.
This ends now!
This ends now.
This ends right now.
This ends now.
This ends now. Construct the cards in this charade now! This ends now.
Mr Speaker, the days of these wedge motions being put to the Parliament and going to a vote end now.
Oh my God, you guys. It's a huge week for the Greens. We're so popular. We're the hot girl at school. Everyone's talking about us. They love us. Emerald Moon, are you feeling condemned? Are you feeling ashamed to be not only just a member of the party of anti-Semitism, but someone hosting an unofficial podcast about said party of anti-Semitism? How are you feeling?
Feeling super condemned, feeling super ashamed. To be honest, though, feeling a little bit out of the loop, because I feel like this is one of those things where it hasn't quite reached Queensland. We've been insulated a little bit. I don't know. I just feel as though I haven't been as far in this whole storm this week. So I'm interested to learn more about what a bad person I am and how bad my party is.
Well, yeah. You've been reading The Australian, which had a front page of Adam Bandt and the headline Party of Anti-Semitism, and a full spread, just straight out, flat out saying it, not putting it in any kind of debate there whatsoever. This is the party of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton have joined to condemn and politically isolate the Greens, accusing the minor party of exploiting the unfolding conflict in Gaza to fuel division and undermine social cohesion. Front page of the national broadsheets.
News.
It's big news. I mean, look, there's definitely some stuff about this that's so ridiculous and funny, but it's fucking bleak, and going through it will be quite a challenge. We thought to reflect on it, we'd be joined by a former Vic Greens candidate, a passionate climate activist, a member of the Jewish Greens working group within the Victorian Greens and the broader Australian Greens, someone with a direct connection to the news this week. He's been referenced in various reports. We're going to find out more. Most importantly, he's a serious danger listener. Campbell Gome. Hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Emerald. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it. If people don't know, you're a public school teacher, long-time climate activist, been involved in lots of direct actions for, trying to stop the planet being cooked. You're a candidate for the hotly contested seat of Northcote in the 2022 Victorian state election. You achieved a 1.5% swing to the party in the 2PP, just pipped to the post. But you're also a member of the Jewish Greens, and I think people might not be totally familiar with the working group, the Jewish Greens. Can you let us know a little bit about that group, why they exist, and the kind of stuff that you guys do?
Yeah, for sure. And I might just start by letting yourself and the listeners know that I'm coming to you from the unceded country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and of course extend my respects to their elders past and present. It hasn't escaped me over recent months and weeks that the name of the federal electorate that I'm in, being Cooper, is particularly poignant at the moment, as both a local resident and as somebody who was raised in a mixed faith household, but as a Jewish person, I was raised with an awareness of and a gratitude for the extraordinary solidarity that William Cooper displayed back in the 1930s at a time where my ancestors were being victimized and suffering and dehumanized, and that display of solidarity was remarkable at the time. And as other First Nations activists currently living in Cooper, like Uncle Gary Foley, like Senator Lydia Thorpe, and Celeste Little, who was also a former candidate for the Greens here, have observed, if William Cooper were alive today, he, like members of the Jewish Greens, like so many other people around the world, would be taking action in peaceful, non-violent protests against the ongoing horrors in Gaza and in Palestine at the moment. Look, the Jewish Greens are a working group within the Australian Greens Victoria. We are Jewish members of various branches geographically dispersed, but we come together to work within the party on issues, policies, comms and things like that come up for Jewish people and advocate for representation of that within our broader platforms and so on. One of the things we've been working on most recently is a guide for candidates to help them navigate the sometimes tricky space of being a good activist and representative and advocating for example, a free Palestine without inadvertently crossing the line into anti-Semitism. So, anti-Semitism is a thing. It's a bad thing. It exists, within our society and with all of our sort of systems and subgroups within society. And there, it's a perspective where we can maybe offer some guidance and help.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure we'll come to us over the course of our conversation. Anti-Semitism is real. It's a scourge. It exists across society and should be condemned rightly. But I suppose I'm interested in your thoughts as a member of the Jewish Greens, as a proud Jewish person, as a proud member of this political party, to see the Australian front page declare the Greens to be the party of anti-Semitism. What do you think when you see that?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty low, and it's unsurprising, unfortunately, because it was less than, well, maybe a bit more than a week ago, but it was perhaps 2 weeks ago that I opened up my Google newsfeed, and I haven't yet worked out how to block the Murdoch press from appearing in that. And I saw a cartoon that had appeared in the Australian that 3/4 of this image was recreating the 2-word anti-Semitic slogan that had been scrawled across a Jewish school here in Melbourne. It was rightly and loudly condemned by Adam and others. It was rightly and quickly covered up and removed and all of that. But to have that shoved down my face and many other people across the country, Jewish people and others, to have the Australian expose us to that just in order to score some cheap points against Adam for his support of free and peaceful protests was shameful.
So this is a cartoon, but I mean the slogan's basically calling for the death of Jewish people, right? And like it's got Adam Bandt with in front of it saying, "Oh yeah, of course I condemn it. They used aerosol paint."
That's the one. Yeah. That's the one. Right. And thank you for not repeating the actual words of that, because again, like, why would we do that?
No need to. Yeah.
It was funny though, right? Like it was really funny because
Adam
Bandt's like a hippie and he doesn't like aerosols. I don't know if did you get it, Emerald?
He's a green, and so he wouldn't because the ozone layer.
Yeah. You get it. Okay, cool. Well, as long as we're all agreed, it's funny. All right, let's sort of look back at exactly what went down this week, because there was a lot of shit going on, and I'm interested in you guys' thoughts. Things sort of kicked off on Monday. We had Senate estimates underway at the moment. Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong got into a stoush with Greens Senator Jordan Steele-John. She accused the Greens politicians of collaborating with violent pro-Palestine protesters and inciting attacks on Labor MPs' offices that have led to public servants being injured, a claim rejected by the Greens as a false smear. Questioned by Greens Senator Jordan Steele-John earlier about whether the government had applied double standards by not imposing sanctions on Israel over its conduct in the war in Gaza, Wong said it is double standards to engage in violent and aggressive protests and incite them and think that you're doing something about peace.
You want to talk about double standards? You want to talk about double standards? I tell you what.
To place sanctions upon
you know,
many other
you know what the double
senators.
standards is? Let me finish on this point. The double standards is you and your party participating in protests which have become violent and aggressive, that Greens MPs speaking outside of rallies which then invade and intimidate people at Labor Party state conferences. Now, what is inappropriate? Staff being injured. Inside at events that a Greens MP speak outside. Greens MPs speak outside an event which is then invaded by protesters. Electorate staff are injured. Your leader, the MP concerned, has written to your leader expressing concern about the role and involvement of Greens MPs, and Mr Bandt has not even replied. It is double standards to engage in violent and aggressive protests and incite them and think that you're doing something about peace. You know, on social media, we have posts which target people personally. We have posts which are threatening and violent, and you are collaborating with them. That is not leadership. So if you think you are for the cause of peace, maybe you should start practicing it in this country.
So this is on Monday night, I believe. This is Penny Wong trying to draw some kind of accusation of hypocrisy or double standard between the Greens, between things that may or may not have happened in certain protests advocating for free Palestine that the Greens may or may not have been vaguely involved with, and sort of saying, hey, stop asking us about our complicity in the nation state of Israel's war on Gaza and the seeming genocide that's taking place. Have a look at it in a mirror, young man, and think about the violence that you're encouraging, you, Jordan Steele-John, for some reason, with your words of calling out for justice for a free Palestine. Do you think this sort of like came out of nowhere, or do you think this is part of a strategy that they were setting up for the motions that would happen in Parliament later in the week? I don't know. What did you make of all that, Emerald?
Me? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it probably was part of a strategy, right? Like if they had stuff to go later in the week, I do think it's so disingenuous for her to just throw something out there like that. Like this is a classic move where she just kind of alludes to something. She's not giving specifics, because if she gave specifics, she would know that those specifics wouldn't stand up, which I think we'll get into, right? Because like, was she alluding to a particular, I guess you could take this to mean any number of things. It could be the protests at universities. It could be anything else. But she's using maybe one detail, which is still incorrect, about whether Greens MPs were at a particular protest outside an MP's office. Is that right? And that's what she's using to say that got violent. And so it's Greens MPs effectively. And I mean, not even to just like, obviously any form of violence is not good. But I think to put that sort of violence on the level of a small-scale protest on the same level as dropping bombs on thousands of women and children in Gaza is also
and that's
pretty
what she did directly. She's like, violence? You want to talk about violence?
Yeah.
What about this person that hurt their ankle? It's just like it's truly pretty galling, I suppose. What did you make of this kind of this outrage, this pearl clutching from Penny Wong, Campbell?
I mean, I certainly agree with Emerald's sense that this is unlikely to have been an off-the-cuff, unplanned week of comms that we have seen rolled out. It seems to me highly likely that it was fairly well coordinated and planned. Whether or not Anthony Albanese and co were counting on the enthusiastic and vocal support of Peter Dutton and co, I can't say. Perhaps that was an unexpected bonus for them. But no, I absolutely agree that this felt planned and coordinated.
I mean, also in that Senate estimate session, Jordan Steele-John asks, whether the Australian government has a position on whether or not Israel is following international law after the death of 35,000 people, at least, of civilians. And Penny Wong's response was, ugh, you come here looking for a social media grab, right? This idea that us pursuing politics and advocating for what we believe in and trying to hold the government to account, which is the entire fucking point of Senate estimates, can just be dismissed as if we're looking for a viral TikTok meme or what the hell are you talking about?
Well, and it's like, yeah, because maybe people are interested to hear your position. If it were going to go somewhere on social media, it's because people want to fucking hear what you have to say because you are the government.
Yes. Imagine. Wong said Greens MPs had spoken at rallies that led to Labor MPs' offices being invaded and electorate staff being injured, as well as the storming of Labor's Victorian State Party conference in May. So these are the sort of examples that she's pointing to inciting. A spokesperson for the Greens said Senator Wong's statements today are not correct. The protest at an MP's event Senator Wong refers to was not addressed by a Greens MP. A former Greens candidate spoke. Now, hot exclusive, not really. This has already been reported, but let's say it's an exclusive of the Serious Danger. The Greens candidate is none other than Campbell Gome himself, our very guest on this episode.
Campbell Gome breaks silence. That's the name of this episode.
Yes, to confirm, my what for a couple of days was my alleged attendance, which made it sound so sinister, as if I had been holding off calls from journalists left, right, and centre, and offering no comment. Yes.
So, what are we talking about? What is the event they're referring to there for people outside Victoria who might not be across this? What was your involvement in this particular process and what went down?
Yeah, I would like to think that we've got better things to do than talk about the many protests that I attend, but here we all find ourselves, and again, this false equivalence is just a ploy to distract, as is this line that they will throw at us, whichever side we're, whatever we happen to be talking about, we either no longer care about the environment or all we care about is the environment, right? Like you can never get it right. I mean, I attend lots of protests, as is my right, and as is consistent with my theory of change. I have been involved in many acts of exercising that right, and including acts of peaceful and non-violent civil disobedience in the environmental space. And over the course of the last few months, since October the 7th, I have visited Jed Carney's office with a couple of fellow members and taken the opportunity to speak to her staff and to remind them that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli state do not speak for me, and they do not speak for all Jewish people when it comes to matters of policy and Palestine and all the rest of it, and that she does not speak in my name when she and at this stage, this was soon after she had abstained from voting, I believe, on a motion or an addendum from Adam calling for a ceasefire in Palestine, and we were asked to accept that her abstinence was a sign of solidarity, because she didn't vote actively vote to block the proposal like the rest of the rest of her her fellow MPs did or whatever. So that was probably late last year. Early this year, I spoke at a rally outside her electoral office, and we can talk about some of the things that I've been talking about then and at other times as well. But I spoke about my perspective as a human being who doesn't like genocide, as a Jewish person who was raised to understand that the story of the Passover festival, like the story with the festival, which is the kind of origin story for all Jewish people, is based on a story about freedom from oppression, and that freedom is a right for all human beings, and that Jewish people, as survivors of times of oppression and times of not feeling safe and not able to gather in their homes, both historically and recently, that Jewish people have a particular obligation to work towards the freedom of all human beings. None of us are free until we are all free. And talked a bit about the Greens and how glad I was as a member of the Greens and a resident in Cooper and Darebin and all the rest of it. How pleased I was to see our elected MPs speaking consistently and using their platforms to amplify calls for a ceasefire and a free and just solution to Israel and Palestine.
And so in the media reporting of your alleged attendance as the Greens representative at these, dangerous, violent protests, was any of that reported, for example?
No, none of that was reported, nor was the fact that I was Jewish, surprisingly enough.
Isn't it?
Seems
relevant.
Yeah, one could wonder about why that might be. So the rally in question, the rally that has been the particular focus of this story about inciting violence, was actually not outside the MP's office. It was at the Thornbury Theatre just down the street, and it was a kind of a joint event where Jed Carney had invited Chris Bowen to come and talk about all things climate policy to the good people of Cooper. And there was a snap action organised outside on the street, outside the venue, and I don't think that's been made very clear yet either. And I was one of the speakers there, and I said pretty much all the same things that I had at the previous rally. I had been to the Uruk Justice Commission hearings the day before, and so I expressed a disappointment that neither the Premier, in her evidence to what is essentially a Royal Commission, a truth-telling process here in Victoria, the Premier of Victoria had been unable to use the word genocide, and that our current MP for Cooper, Jed Carney, had also not yet been able to use that word in the context of what's currently going on. So I spoke, and then I went home because I've got a dog who was barking in the background. He was interrupting our recording a second ago. I went home. End of story. And anything else that happened at that rally, I know as much as, or probably less than any of you, because it's only what I've read, seen, or heard. I did not incite violence. I did not call on the attendees to go and break windows or spray paint. In fact, I did explicitly say that I was feeling a little bit torn because as a climate activist, I would have loved to have been in there, and I would have loved to have been asking Chris Bowen about the approvals of the Barroso gas project, about the 116 coal and gas projects that are still in the pipeline, about the extinction crisis playing out in Macquarie Harbour, and that I would have liked to have been able to ask about not just the climate impacts of the conflict in Gaza, but the humanitarian impacts as well. And I expressed a hope that audience members in the forum who had tickets would be able to ask those questions and demand answers.
So you incited question asking. You demanded...
guilty. Yeah. You got me.
A bloody violent call for people to ask their elected representatives questions about their policy
only if they had tickets.
areas. Yes. But so people don't know. So that things clearly did kick off. You left, okay, but there was a particular bit of spiciness going on there. I believe there was reports that Jed Carney and Chris Bowen had to be escorted by police away. Things were kicking off a little bit. And I suppose this is some things that we've seen over the course of activism and protests for the Palestinian cause. Some things have kicked off. We've seen a lot of graffiti. There have been stunts like putting fake corpses at the front of Labor MPs' offices. There is an ongoing blockade or Little Palestine that's been set up outside Albanese's office in Marrickville. I didn't know that he hasn't shown up there at all. He hasn't been to that office. I believe there are reports of them renting another office space so they don't have to deal with this, this situation, which is pretty wild. There has been smashed windows. There were protests at the Victorian State Labor Conference. Quite a few allegations of homophobic and sexist comments. Some of them, these sort of allegations are kind of thrown around often without being substantiated, it seems. The physical injuries, the only thing that I could find was reports of one staff member injuring her hip after being pushed, while another needed to wear an ankle brace after protesters stomped on her ankle. I mean, incidents that I think you could agree, is not ideal, is not good necessarily.
Unlikely to be intentional.
Whether they're intentional is a very good point as well, and whether the Greens have much responsibility for this stuff at all. I mean, the main property damage that we've seen has been explicitly sort of owned by WECO, Whistleblowers, Activists and Communities Alliance. Like, they're literally filming themselves vandalizing, if you will, these electorate offices and posting them to social media saying, this is us, we're doing this stuff. And so it seems to me to be an extremely long bow to draw between that and the Greens having to speaking out, or because they happen to politically agree with a lot of these protests when it comes to Palestine. Are you worried about any of this vandalism or violence, Everald? What do you think?
Am I worried? I mean, not really, to be honest. Like, a smashed window, I'm sure it sucks probably that someone has to fix that, I guess. But it is that thing of that, when quote unquote legitimate channels are pursued and those in power are not listening and not acting. And in fact, refusing to respond to questions, refusing to even engage with the enormous groundswell of support for Palestine, then what are people, you can't be surprised when people then take illegitimate actions to try to get a response, right, and try to get action.
And yes, and you have to, to have a serious conversation about this, you have to acknowledge that overwhelmingly the protest movement for Palestine has been overwhelmingly peaceful. And you cannot tell this same story of violence and storming and graffiti without also telling the story of families for Palestine that are simply peacefully standing outside Anthony Albanese's electorate office saying, hey, please do more to stop this horrific genocide that is taking place in our name. You are complicit in this horrible war crimes. You're not doing enough. We are peacefully but forcefully asking you to do something about this, right?
Yeah, 100%. And as much as obviously some MPs' offices and perhaps some staff have been, involved in some stuff that we all may have preferred hadn't happened. The Labor Party are not the only victims here, and they are certainly not suffering in the order of magnitude that the tens of thousands of Palestinian people who have been killed, and the many more who are struggling to survive. This is a humanitarian crisis. And look, I'm a teacher, and I do get very focused on the children. And I've been a teacher for 12 years. I had one student who I had taught for many years who passed away just through illness. But like, when you've had that personal connection to the grief and the trauma that the death of one child causes in a family, in a school community, in a wider community, it's beyond imagination what the death of 15,000 children, what that collective trauma is like. I believe that there are something like 30,000 children living in Cooper, the electorate of Cooper at the moment, and it's hard not to walk down the streets and think one in two of that number in Palestine have been killed in the last 8 months.
So then, after the sort of fracas between Wong and Jordan Steele-John in Senate estimates, on Wednesday we had full-out condemnation palooza. It all kicked off by Sophie Scamps, the TLMP, asking a question during question time about social cohesion. Now, again, it seems there are conflicting reports. Simon Benson at The Australian believes that this was all coordinated, like the wording of the question was lined up with the Labor Party. It was all orchestrated so that they could have this particular moment.
It is unacceptable that misinformation is being consciously and deliberately spread by some Green senators and MPs who have engaged in this in demonstrations outside offices and online. Enough is enough. I've supported justice for Palestinians my whole life and still do. It is tragic that the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people are undermined by some people engaging in activity that completely alienates the Australian public.
The Greens political party today is properly and rightly condemned.
People in our electorates genuinely have real fear of what is happening. For them, it is not a political game. And can I just put this one point? When the resolution was put on a suspension of standing orders from the Green Party last time, it was a procedural motion.
That's right.
The question of recognition was never before this Parliament. And yet, the Greens chose to message something to Australia and to the world that was inaccurate. And they got headlines around the world that hurt the Palestinian cause but helped the Greens harvest votes. What sort of party on an issue like that makes a decision to harvest their own votes? I move the debate be adjourned.
I mean, they went truly nuts, right? They basically condemned the Greens political party, which is what we're called at all times, as spreading misinformation. We're harvesting votes. Anthony Albanese said, "I've supported justice for Palestinians my whole life and still do. It is tragic that the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people are undermined by some people engaging in activity that completely alienates the Australian public due to the nature of that." I love this attack too, because we're both harvesting votes for our own political gain, but we're also alienating the public at the same time. I'm not sure how we're able to manage both of those at the same time. That's kind of impressive, I suppose. But the biggest charge, it seems, was, at least from the Labor Party, I mean, Dutton went flat out with calling us anti-Semitic and saying that we deny the Holocaust, basically. But this charge of misinformation. Clearly, Labor MPs are getting very annoyed at the fact that Greens are pointing out facts about how much this Labor government and Australia is complicit in the Israel state's war on Gaza and Palestinians, and pointing out the fact that the Greens tried to introduce a motion to the Parliament to recognise Palestinian statehood, which is in the Labor platform, and the Parliament shut it down, basically. Yes, it was a procedural motion to bring on the vote on that particular question, but as we discussed with Rachel Withers on last week's show, it is such politician brain to think that people do not interpret that as this Labor government and people in the Parliament failing to do anything about the question of Palestinian statehood and effectively voting no on it. What do we make of these charges of harvesting votes, misinformation, anti-Semitism, the furor that was unleashed on Wednesday in Parliament?
Do you want to go first, Emerald?
I mean, the misinformation, like particularly around whether Australia is supplying weapons to Israel, that again, it's similar to the misinformation about whether Australian Parliament voted down a Greens motion to recognise Palestine. It's like it is pure semantics. And they know it, and but they just continue to cling to it. And whether the legal definition of manufacturing and exporting weapons is met in a way that it needs to be declared and placed on a particular register, whether that is the substantive question, or whether the substantive question is Australia complicit in the provision of weapons or parts that are used to drop weapons specifically on women and children in Gaza. That is what people care about. And surely they know that that's what people care about. And that's why they think they can just say, well, there is a misinformation, or, there's a technicality that might be incorrect there. And so that's what we want you to focus on. But I just don't think anyone's fucking buying it anymore. The fact remains that every single, whatever it is, the Boeing planes, the F-35 bombers, the parts that enable the bombs to be dropped from those planes in Gaza, used by Israel, sold to Israel by the United States, those parts are manufactured in Australia. And the Australian government is allowing that to happen. That is a fact.
Yes, there was a great response from Pat Conroy, who I believe is somewhere in defence of whatever Labor MP. He was clarifying, he was setting the record straight in Parliament. And he was saying the Australian government hasn't got a contract with Elbit Systems, okay? The Australian government has a contract with this other company, and they have a contract with Elbit Systems, and they just happen to be ending up with $917 million, almost $1 billion of taxpayers' money. And yes, Elbit Systems technologies were directly linked to the drones that killed Frankie Zocom, an Australian citizen, for God's sakes, when she was volunteering trying to make the world a better place. But the Greens, you see, they're the real bad guys. They're the real villains in all this.
Right.
We, the Australian Labor political party, are the real victims, and the Greens are the real perpetrators of evil and violence in this conflict.
Yeah. Because wouldn't you know it, evil fucking corporations doing evil fucking shit use complex corporate structures to obscure their evil shit, and maybe that always make it more easier to hide behind, like.
Absolutely. And well, I mean, look, if you were writing this as a movie, right? Like if we were writing a political thriller in which our taxpayer dollars were being funneled through contracts and corporations to weapons manufacturers to facilitate acts of genocide, when you got to the bit where the drone or the fighter actually that our taxpayer dollars supported, when that drone actually killed an Australian aid worker, the writers' room would be like, whoa, hang on, that's too much. Like, it would never happen. You can't make this stuff up, and it is terrible, and it is not anti-Semitic to want peace in Palestine. It is not anti-Semitic to want our taxpayer dollars to be diverted away from supporting weapons manufacturers and arms exports to nation states who are using them to commit what the ICC has found could well be acts of genocide.
I mean, it's literally the plot of All My Sons, the Arthur Miller play, in which the guy's like providing the weapons that end up going into the plane that then kill his own son when he goes off to war. It's like, he literally made it up as, about 70 years ago. So I guess, as you say, I don't think this strategy is working because people aren't really buying it, because the Labor sort of has to defend the status quo, and they have to sort of make the argument, the Greens are crazy, we're doing literally everything we can to try and stop Israel's onslaught in Gaza. And I think that any normal person who might be vaguely across this news just can clearly tell that that's not the case, right? I mean, we are still maintaining a level of solidarity and allyship with Israel. We're not talking about sanctions. We're not talking about expelling the ambassador. Where at best the government has been neutral on questions of like whether they're committing war crimes or contravening international law, or what the ICC is doing when it comes to Israel. So I guess that's my other question is like, is any of this cutting through? Will Labor and the coalition be patting themselves on the back after this week? Do they think it's all landing, even with the full backing of the Murdoch media, or do you reckon most people smell bullshit?
Campbell?
Oh, yeah, gee. I mean, I think I fear that there is a portion of the population who are pretty happy to accept anything that smears the Greens. I fear that it is an effective, well-planned and well-executed attack, and I hope that it won't land, and I hope that it won't resonate. But what I know is that members of the Greens, including many members of the Jewish Greens who have been deeply involved in the solidarity with the Free Palestine movement, will show up again on Sunday and will continue to do the work to work towards peace.
I thought Adam's response in Parliament was pretty effective. Greens leader Adam Bandt said, children are dying because the Israeli army has engineered a famine, and instead of talking about the victims, the Prime Minister wants to make it about himself. I will not be lectured to about peace and non-violence by people who back the invasion of Gaza. Fuck yeah. Mr. Bandt moved a motion calling for Australia to end all direct and indirect trade of military equipment with Israel, accusing the government of complicity in the unfolding genocide. The motion was comprehensively rejected by the Parliament. Fantastic stuff, everyone.
Good,
well done.
Great.
Just really playing into it.
Cool Parliament.
And then just, last little hits on this story. I mean, the next day, people lost their minds. Peter Dutton went on 2GB to call us evil and said that Mr. Bandt was unfit to be in office.
People need to have a conversation with their kids and their grandkids, with their next-door neighbours, just about how evil the current Greens party is. They're nothing about the environment. They're all about radical causes.
Dutton said go door knocking.
I would love to have that conversation with my grandparents about how evil the Greens are. That'd be great.
Yeah.
And then you had Mark Dravis, the Attorney General, the number one law officer in the world, in the country rather, going on radio to say this. I think the Greens political party, and particularly the leader of the Greens political party, Two Greens political parties in one
Greens
sentence.
PPs.
Love that. Have got something to answer for here in the way that they've been encouraging criminal damage of MPs, electorates, officers, encouraging really riotous behaviour, sometimes violent behaviour that has been occurring outside electorate offices. I mean, that was pretty fucking wild, right? They're trying to like Donald Trump January 6th, Adam Bandt and the Greens MPs, as far as I can tell, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is perfectly reasonable. Adam Bandt sort of sent him a lawyer's letter saying that's pretty defamatory.
Is that
to
defamatory?
say that the Greens are actively encouraging violent behaviour? Like, you have to give examples of that if you want to defend that in court. But more importantly, you should be more careful about your public statements as Attorney General in the public. When you're outside of the sweetness of parliamentary privilege, hands up, people are going to take it to you. Do you think he made the right call there, Ebril, to sort of to take the Attorney General to court?
I mean, when it gets to that level, when he's identifying specifically the leader of the Greens political party for, quote, encouraging riotous behaviour, and sometimes violent behaviour. He's patently identifying him lying. Like, I think that's I'm not a lawyer, but it sounds like pretty good grounds for a shut the fuck up or I'll sue you for defamation letter.
And that's when it's just an example of sort of overplaying the hand, and I think, and the disconnect between any actual grievance that might be out there about these kind of protests and the clear political attack that Labor's doing and the distraction that they want to hit really hard, right? They don't want people to be talking about what their government is failing to do when it comes to, standing in solidarity with Palestine and standing up to get to this illegal, horrific war that's going on. They want to talk about the Greens and bash the left. Fucking amazing. I guess while we've got you, Campbell, it'd be great. I'd just like to hear your thoughts about the conversation around the scourge of anti-Semitism, as we said. As you said, it exists everywhere in society. The Greens are not immune from that, like any political party. But I'm interested in how to interrogate or take this stuff on good faith, when clearly, it seems to me, allegations of anti-Semitism are often weaponized and are wheeled out in very selective ways to try and minimize or demonize pro-Palestinian politics. And I mean, there was also an issue in the Parliament this week in which Julian Leeser is trying to get an inquiry into anti-Semitism on university campus, which was eventually deferred by the government. And he literally came out and said, I don't want to hear anything else about Islamophobia, right? He's sort of, giving a very special status to anti-Semitism as a form of racist hatred, and that we should basically ignore or dismiss or minimize any allegations of Islamophobia at the same time. So you see stuff like that and you think, well, how are we to negotiate or to deal with these allegations and conversations around anti-Semitism, the hatred, as progressive people who also want to stand up for Palestine?
Yeah. Look, great question. I might say two things. The Jewish Greens have been very pleased with and grateful for the level of access that we've had to Jordan Steele-John and Adam Bandt and their staff when we've needed to work through issues around perceptions of where the line is, what's anti-Semitic and what's not, and where the false equivalences all get a little bit much. We have to condemn everything, and before we can actually talk about the issue before us. They have been, they've been very available and very responsive and very supportive. And similarly, in the work on policy, we haven't really talked much about policy. It is unfortunate that when you Google Greens' position on Israel-Palestine, the first document that comes up is the one from 2010, which is out of date. And it's kind of important that people engage with some of the detail in the 2022 position. No need to go into that now. Look, some of the most useful conversations that I have had with folks as a progressive Jewish person trying to be present and be supportive of a peaceful and non-violent movement for peace and freedom in Palestine, while sometimes having to maybe navigate or advocate for my personal perceptions of where some of that might be coming up against the line of anti-Semitism. Some of the most valuable conversations I've had have been with Islamic people and activists about about their community's response to things like the co-option of sacred texts. So you might remember the ISIS flag co-opted a particular passage from a sacred Islamic text that is dear to people for all sorts of reasons, and all of a sudden that became associated with bad stuff, with terrorism. In the same way that, as like, I'll be honest with you, as a Jewish person, when I see the flag of the nation state of Israel with a red line drawn through it, I do have to acknowledge the deep kind of emotional, intergenerational kind of traumatic response that is my initial response to that. You know, my grandparents got out of Poland just before the Holocaust, and that the image, the six-pointed Star of David, like that text, the text that was co-opted by ISIS, it has real emotional resonance and meaning to us. And there is an initial response, which is, wow, I don't feel good about that. I can then step back and separate myself from that and say, and realize that this is a symbol that has been co-opted by the nation state of Israel, and perhaps it's certainly understandable that others in the movement feel that it's a legitimate target. The Jewish Greens would prefer that Greens comms didn't go down that line, and that's kind of part of the work that we've been doing. But yeah, look, it's like that broader the conversation about at what point does participating in a broad protest movement and a movement for social change, at what point does participation imply agreement with every view expressed by every member of everybody involved in that movement? Yeah, like we've all been to protests outside of the Free Palestine space where views have been expressed or positions stated that we might not feel 100% comfortable, but as long as we're moving in the same general direction, like that's movement building, that's collaboration, and all the rest of it. And in speaking to a fellow member of our branch, who is a Muslim fella and has been very involved in all of that, we were reflecting on the common ancestry of Arabic and Hebrew. So when you greet somebody in Hebrew, you say Shalom Aleichem, and in Arabic you say Salam Alaikum. Right? They sound the same because the languages grew up together. And every time you greet somebody in either Arabic or in Hebrew, you are saying, peace be with you. And that's something that I have spoken to my students about in 2015 after the terrorist attacks in Paris and the subsequent rise in Islamophobic remarks and acts in our local community, and at a time when our Muslim students were feeling uncertain and unsafe and threatened. It was actually the two Jewish teachers on staff, myself and a colleague, who went to the staff room and said, hey, we need to do something about this. We need to work with the kids and their families, and we need to have an assembly and say, hey, we see you, and we know that these acts do not represent you, your communities, your families, and your religions. It's perhaps not dissimilar to the William Cooper story.
It's one of the most, it's a really interesting point you make around the co-option of symbols and things like that, because I find it one of the most insidious things in the conversations that I have had with pro-Israel folks is the conflation of Israel with all Jewish people, and the idea that, well, yes, it's our right to, claim the Star of David as representative of Israel, and almost that, by virtue then sidelining all other associations that Jewish people might have and importance that might have for them, and tying it up in then a geopolitical kind of or an ideological debate that actually does affect Jewish people. I mean, I I was trying to think of whether I can relate on any level, and it's kind of obviously has differences, but similar to the way that as a feminist, like I kind of don't want to use a lot of old feminist symbolism because it would be associated with TERFs now, like that a lot of the old ways that I might have been able to identify as a feminist, I think I just kind of relinquish now. It becomes a casualty of that ideological war, that culture war between, anti-trans feminists, quote unquote feminists, and the broader feminist movement that is really quite tragic in a way.
And I'm sure that no doubt affects, like that has real effects in terms of your networks and your communities and your relationships with others. Like there are Jewish activists and family members in my circle, down in this part of the world who, up until October the 6th, were regularly holding vigils, calling out the Netanyahu government for their takeover of the courts and for their kind of right-wing agenda and platform. And on October the 8th, I think it was understandable that Jewish people and others had a massive collective emotional response to the Hamas attacks on the 7th, right? But 8 months down the track, the fact that so many Jewish people and other people have not been able to just take a beat and reframe their worldview or reconsider their long-held progressive values in the context of what's going on in Palestine at the moment. I think that sadly that speaks volumes to how effective the Netanyahu government's comms machine was. The language of dehumanizing of Palestinian people that was present from from October 8th onwards was brutally efficient at making Jewish people feel scared and unsafe and insecure. And it's one of the things that I find most disturbing in all of this is seeing the state of Israel deploy the same language and tactics that have so effectively been deployed against Jewish people at other times in history and in other parts of the world.
I thought we could maybe just round out this conversation with some posts that I thought were helpful and clarifying for some Greens comrades and friends to just remind us about the nonsense of this week. From Senator Nick McKim. Yesterday in Parliament, Labor and Liberals united in defence of genocide by launching a coordinated hit on the Greens for daring to speak out against the slaughter in Gaza. We will not be lectured by genocide enablers. Labor has been far more outraged about a bit of paint on a building than about the slaughter of children in Gaza. Labor MPs are not the victims of this conflict. The people of Gaza are. Sophie McNeil, who is a upcoming Greens candidate, tweeted, amid the lies attacks on the Greens, remember F-35 planes killing civilians in Gaza are fitted with Australian-made parts. This government has a $900 million deal with an Israeli arms company, 35,000 dead, and the Albanese government has not taken any concrete steps to hold Israel to account. And I'm going to give a shout out to our comrades of the Victorian Socialists, who tweeted, credit to the Greens for taking a principled stand against Israel's genocide in Gaza and provoking a bipartisan political tantrum by people in politics and the media who think the biggest atrocity vis-a-vis Palestine is the fact that people keep protesting about it. Thank you, Victorian Socialist comrades. I think all that is quite clarifying. You got to see through these distractions and this bullshit, and solidarity to folks who had to be splashed on the front of papers and had to be demonized this week as the two major parties wield this political attack. Campbell, thank you very much for joining us on the show. People should definitely check out and follow the Jewish Greens to find out more. If they're Jewish people themselves, if they're members themselves, they should totally get involved. And you also have some pro-Palestinian rallies coming up that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, we do indeed. So as many of your listeners will know, there are pro-Palestine rallies every Sunday, kicking off at the State Library at 11 o'clock. and encourage everybody to get along to those. I would also like to let people know that on Saturday, the 15th of June at 11 o'clock in the morning, a group will be gathering outside Nathan Lambert's office. Nathan Lambert is the state MP, Labor MP for Preston. We'll be gathering outside his office in Bell Street and marching in solidarity and calling for a ceasefire and peace in Palestine. We'll head down past Jed Carney's office. I will try not to break any windows on as we go past, and we will finish at the state MP for Northcote, Kat Theophanous' office, and we should be there about 1 o'clock. So people should please come along and join us there. Can I give 2 other very quick shout outs?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So as well as following the Jewish Greens on Insta, which we would love, I would recommend to you Standing Together, the website, and especially their Humanitarian Guard, who are Jewish people protecting aid convoys from settlers. I can maybe give the website to Michael. And the other one is the Jewish Council of Australia. They also have a great website and some great resources there.
Yes, a group speaking on behalf of some Jewish Australians who are progressive on the question of Israel-Palestine and want to stand up for a free and just Palestine. A fantastic initiative. Very glad they exist, and great shout-outs there. Thank you, Campbell Gome. We really appreciate it, man. Cheers.
Thanks, Campbell.
Thanks so much for having me.
Serious danger to Australia.